How to use dark psychology to make women chase you. 1. The seductive power of dark psychology. Introduction to the protagonist and his desires. Ethan was never the type of man who could easily get a woman's attention. He was always the quiet one, the invisible man in the corner, watching others flirt, charm, and manipulate their way into the hearts of women while he remained unnoticed. At first, this didn't bother him too much. He was content in his own little world, living a life of routine and solitude. But deep inside, there was a burning desire, a hunger to be seen, admired, and desired. One night, after yet another failed date and countless rejections, Ethan found himself at a bar, nursing a drink and reflecting on his endless string of disappointments. The frustration gnawed at him until, by sheer chance, he overheard a conversation between two men discussing something he had never heard of before: dark psychology. They spoke in hushed tones, as though they were sharing forbidden knowledge: manipulation, psychological control, and the subtle art of making others fall into your power. They casually mentioned how these techniques could make women chase you, make them crave your presence, and mold them into what you wanted them to be. Curious, Ethan began to research the art of dark psychology, an intricate and dangerous blend of manipulation, mind games, and psychological warfare. It was like an entirely new world opened up before him. His life, once defined by insecurity, now seemed ripe for transformation. He devoured books, videos, and online courses on the subject, eagerly soaking up every tactic, every trick. He learned about the psychology of attraction, the power of suggestion, and how to tap into a woman's deepest vulnerabilities. Slowly, the world began to feel like a chessboard, and Ethan was ready to move the pieces. Armed with his newfound knowledge, Ethan began to experiment. He started small, testing his skills on friends, acquaintances, and strangers. His confidence grew with each success. His charm became more potent, his words more calculated. Women who had once dismissed him now found themselves drawn to him, intrigued by the mystery and magnetism he exuded. He no longer needed to try. The women came to him, each one more enamored than the last. He realized he had become a puppet master, controlling the very strings of attraction. But Ethan's mind was a storm of contradictions. As the women chased him, he began to lose sight of himself. The more control he gained, the more disconnected he became from the person he once was. He was no longer just Ethan. He was an illusion, a carefully crafted persona designed to allure, deceive, and manipulate. Twist. One day, as Ethan was walking down the street, a woman from his past appeared, Maya. She was an enigmatic figure from his college days, someone who had once caught his eye, but had slipped away into the shadows of his memory. Maya was everything he wasn't: confident, sharp, and full of mystery. But she wasn't just a face from the past. She had been watching him, studying him, and had recognized the dangerous path he was treading. With a quiet smile, she revealed that she knew all about his fascination with dark psychology. But what she said next shocked him. It's not just about controlling others, Ethan. It's about understanding yourself. Dark psychology isn't a tool for power. It's a mirror. And what you see in that mirror might be the thing you fear the most. Maya extended a hand, offering to teach him the deeper layers of this art, if he was willing to pay the price. Ethan, intrigued and eager to learn more, accepted. He had no idea that Maya was about to plunge him into a world darker than he could ever imagine, where the rules of manipulation, control, and obsession would no longer be in his hands. Let me know if you'd like further details or adjustments. Here's a more detailed and enriched version of asterisk asterisk. The power play begins asterisk asterisk. 2. The power play begins. Ethan's rise and the games he plays. After accepting Maya's offer to teach him the deeper aspects of dark psychology, Ethan's life changed in ways he hadn't anticipated. Maya's teachings were far more intense than he ever imagined. She didn't just show him the surface-level techniques of manipulation. She dug deep into the recesses of his mind, unlocking fears, desires, and vulnerabilities he never even knew existed. She taught him how to read people like books, how to twist their emotions and desires to his advantage, and how to exploit their weaknesses without them even realizing it. His first real test came soon after. A woman named Sophia, a colleague at work, had always been distant with him, polite but not interested. Armed with Maya's teachings, Ethan decided to put them to the test. He didn't use brute force to manipulate her. Instead, he used subtle tactics, mirroring her body language, speaking in a way that reflected her deepest desires, and offering just the right amount of attention and distance. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Sophia began to change. She started seeking him out, initiating small conversations, and even inviting him to lunch. Within weeks, Sophia, who had once hardly noticed him, was now emotionally invested in him. She began to seek his approval, craving his presence, and soon he was the center of her world. This victory gave Ethan a sense of power he'd never known before. The thrill of knowing he could control someone's emotions, could shape their desires and manipulate their actions, sent a rush through his veins like nothing else. The world seemed to bend to his will, and the women around him were nothing more than pieces on a chessboard, waiting for him to make the next move. His newfound charm and control weren't confined to his personal life alone. At work, Ethan used his psychological tactics to win favor with higher-ups, subtly manipulating his colleagues to take the fall for his mistakes while positioning himself as indispensable. His professional success skyrocketed. Promotions, praise, and power became his new reality. But as he climbed the social and professional ladder, Ethan's relationships grew increasingly hollow. Each victory felt more like a temporary conquest than a genuine connection. The women he ensnared, like Sophia, came and went, their emotions fleeting and shallow. He no longer saw them as real people, but as tools to test his power. There was a nagging emptiness that lingered beneath the surface, a feeling that his victories were too easy, too hollow. Each conquest felt like a trap, a reminder that the more he manipulated, the more he lost himself. Despite his growing success, Ethan's insatiable hunger for more power and control pushed him further into the abyss. He had come to view every woman he met as a challenge. How could he bend her will, make her chase him, and then discard her once he had what he wanted? But this was a game that had no winners. Even as he manipulated others, Ethan began to lose his grip on the one thing that mattered most: his sense of self. One day, while attending a high-profile event, he met a stunning woman who seemed completely immune to his charm. Elena was different from anyone he had encountered. She was confident, intelligent, and unfazed by his usual psychological tricks. Ethan, who had always been able to weave his web and trap anyone he desired, found himself intrigued by her cold indifference. For the first time, he felt out of control. Instead of playing the usual mind games, Ethan decided to take a different approach with Elena. He tried to be more direct, more genuine, but she seemed to see through him like a glass wall. Elena wasn't impressed by his superficial charm. Her responses were calculated, her body language neutral. It was as if she were immune to everything Ethan had worked so hard to master. Twist. Elena didn't just seem uninterested. She was playing him in ways Ethan couldn't even fathom. As he tried to learn more about her, he began to notice subtle things. The way she moved, the way she spoke, the way she seemed to always be one step ahead. The more he tried to manipulate her, the more he realized she was subtly turning the tables, using his own tactics against him. It wasn't long before Elena made her first move. She invited him to a private dinner, where she casually began asking about his life, his insecurities, and his past, questions he had learned to avoid. With every response, Lena drew him deeper into her web. He was no longer the one in control. She was unraveling him in a way that was both terrifying and thrilling. And for the first time, Ethan found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about dark psychology. Ethan was hooked. Elena, it seemed, was a challenge like no other. His usual tricks weren't working on her, and for the first time in his life, he had met someone who made him feel out of his depth. This power struggle was no longer just about women. It was about something much deeper. Ethan realized that the game he had been playing was about to change, and the stakes were higher than ever. Let me know if you'd like further adjustments or details. Here's a more detailed and enriched version of the shifting dynamics of power. 3. The shifting dynamics of power. Losing control and losing himself. As Ethan's manipulations deepened, the very power he had sought began to turn on him. What once felt like a carefully orchestrated dance of control and conquest now felt more like an entangling web that he couldn't escape. The lines between what was real and what was just a manipulation blurred. The more he controlled others, the more he realized that he was no longer in control of himself. At first, Ethan believed the emptiness he felt was just a side effect of his success. After all, power wasn't supposed to feel like warmth or connection. It was about dominance, wasn't it? But the more victories he racked up, the more hollow those victories seemed. Every woman he lured into his life seemed to add to the weight of his growing internal conflict. Their admiration, their desire, it was all too fleeting, like the passing of seasons. None of it lasted. None of it mattered. It was Elena, however, who seemed to unravel him in ways that no one else could. Ethan became obsessed with her, unable to understand why his usual tricks were so ineffective. She was like an enigma, always just out of his grasp, always one step ahead, as though she had seen every move he made before he made it. In their interactions, Elena was calm, collected, and enigmatic, never giving Ethan the satisfaction of revealing how she truly felt. She didn't play by the same rules as the others, and that intrigued him more than anything. The more he chased her, the further she seemed to pull away. Where others had fallen for his subtle manipulations or fallen under his charm, Elena remained unaffected. What started as a simple challenge became an obsession. Ethan couldn't stop thinking about her, what made her tick, how she saw through his games, and why she refused to be manipulated. The fact that she remained indifferent to his power was both maddening and intoxicating. In an attempt to maintain his control, Ethan began to use more extreme measures, trying to make her feel something, anything, in response to him. But the more he pushed, the further she retreated. One night, during an emotionally charged confrontation, Elena dropped a bombshell that shook Ethan to his core. "You think you're the only one who knows how to manipulate people?" she asked, her voice a mixture of amusement and pity. "You're just a puppet, Ethan, and I'm the one pulling your strings." Ethan froze, unable to respond. His mind raced. How could she know? How could she see through him so easily? The realization hit him hard. Elena had been playing the same psychological game all along, using him, reading his vulnerabilities, and turning his manipulations back on him. But what stunned him the most was the fact that she hadn't just been outmaneuvering him, she had been drawing him into her own psychological trap. She had studied him, learned his weaknesses, and used them to make him emotionally vulnerable, just as he had done with countless others. The tables had turned. Elena wasn't just a woman he could control. She was the one controlling him. As Ethan struggled to maintain his sense of identity, he began to spiral deeper into self-doubt. He had always prided himself on his ability to manipulate others, to control their emotions and desires. But now, for the first time, he felt helpless, unable to understand what was happening to him. He was no longer the master of his own game. Instead, he was the pawn in someone else's hands. In the wake of his encounter with Elena, Ethan found himself grappling with more than just the loss of control over her. He had lost control over everything. He no longer knew who he was without his manipulations, without his carefully crafted persona. The very tools he had used to shape his life had started to shape him in ways he couldn't understand. The emptiness he had felt before was now an all-consuming void. Twist. One night, when he couldn't sleep, Ethan revisited his old journals, the ones he had kept during his earlier days of experimenting with dark psychology. As he read through the pages, he began to notice something disturbing. His writing had changed. His thoughts were no longer about power, dominance, and control. There was a growing self-loathing in his words, a growing awareness that his pursuit of control had come at the cost of his humanity. The realization was clear. He was no longer just a manipulator. He was becoming a victim of his own tactics. This discovery sent Ethan into a tailspin. He wasn't sure if Elena was a reflection of the woman he truly desired or a mirror that exposed the darkest parts of his soul. Every step he took to assert his power felt like another step deeper into a psychological prison. His sense of self was slipping away, and the more he tried to manipulate his way out of it, the more entangled he became in the web of his own making. Ethan was losing himself in a game that was no longer about women, power, or control. It was about something much darker, a battle for his soul. Let me know if you'd like any further adjustments or if you'd like to dive deeper into certain aspects. Here's a more detailed and enriched version of the maze of manipulations. 4. The maze of manipulations. Allies or enemies. Ethan's world had become a labyrinth of deceit, a maze where he could no longer tell who his allies were or if anyone was truly on his side. The more he tried to manipulate others, the more he found himself being drawn into a psychological web that he couldn't escape. Elena had shown him that he wasn't the only player in the game. He was no longer the puppet master, he was the puppet, tangled in a complex network of emotional manipulation and mind games that stretched far beyond what he had ever imagined. As Ethan desperately tried to regain control of his life, he began to realize something horrifying. The women he had manipulated in the past were no longer just victims in his game. They had all returned, and they were playing by the same rules he had used on them. Sophia, Elena, and even some women from earlier conquests began reappearing in his life, each with their own mysterious motives. They didn't appear out of nowhere. Ethan had unknowingly drawn them back into his orbit with his manipulative actions, but now they weren't the naive, emotionally invested women he had once controlled. They had evolved, becoming far more aware and dangerous. Sophia, the first woman Ethan had successfully manipulated, had changed since their brief relationship. The playful, vulnerable woman he had seduced was now an enigma, a woman who had learned the art of manipulation herself. She'd begun a new relationship with someone close to Ethan's inner circle, a powerful businessman who had always been an ally to Ethan. But Sophia was no longer the submissive figure she had once been. She subtly undermined Ethan at every opportunity, positioning herself as an authority in ways that made Ethan's own influence seem irrelevant. Her actions spoke volumes. She was no longer a pawn, but a queen in her own right. Elena, however, was the most dangerous of them all. Not only had she turned the tables on Ethan by playing him with his own tactics, but now she was the one orchestrating events. Elena reappeared with a newfound sense of purpose. She had manipulated Ethan into a psychological corner, pushing him to confront his deepest fears and insecurities. But now, her methods were even more sophisticated. She used her charm to bring others into her web. Slowly, she gathered allies, people from Ethan's past who had been casualties of his manipulative schemes, and began to form a network that operated behind the scenes. Elena was no longer just the woman he desired. She was a formidable force, a mastermind in her own right. What made Elena even more dangerous was her ability to plant doubt in Ethan's mind. She subtly suggested that all the women he had manipulated were not just victims. They were participants in a much larger game, one that he had failed to recognize until it was too late. They had been using him just as much as he had used them. Each interaction with Elena felt like another layer of control being stripped away from him. He no longer knew who to trust, and his world started to feel like a series of fractured illusions. As Ethan spiraled deeper into this maze of manipulations, he found himself confronting a terrifying truth. The people he had used to bolster his power had come together in a way that he could never have foreseen. They were all part of an intricate plot, a conspiracy, perhaps, with their own motives, all aimed at taking him down. Each woman he had once controlled had become a puppet master in her own right, and now Ethan was their puppet. His attempts to fight back felt futile. Every move he made was anticipated. When he tried to isolate Elena, she would have already anticipated his actions and prepared accordingly. When he attempted to manipulate Sophia into doing his bidding, he discovered that she had already turned the tables by manipulating others in his circle. The web was too tight, and the more he struggled, the more trapped he became. Twist. But just as Ethan was beginning to feel completely helpless, Maya, his mysterious mentor, made a reappearance. Her sudden return seemed like a beacon of hope for Ethan. She was the one who had taught him the dark psychology that had gotten him so far, and maybe, just maybe, she had the answers he was desperately seeking. But when Maya finally revealed herself, she wasn't the mentor he had once admired. Instead, she was the architect of the entire game. Maya confessed that she had been watching Ethan's every move from the beginning, manipulating him into becoming the person he had become. She admitted that the women who had returned to his life, Sophia, Elena, and others, were all pawns in her greater plan. The entire psychological battle had been orchestrated by her to teach Ethan a lesson. Dark psychology, the very thing he had used to gain power, was not something that could be mastered without consequences. Maya revealed that she had once been in Ethan's shoes, consumed by the hunger for control and power, and she had used him as part of a larger experiment to see if he could break free from the destructive cycle. But now, Maya had shifted the balance. Ethan had become just another player in the game she had set in motion. Ethan was now faced with the shocking realization that everything he had done, every manipulation and every conquest, had been part of a much larger experiment. The power dynamics he thought he understood were nothing more than illusions, and the people around him were not just characters in his story. They were players in a game that he had never truly understood. Let me know if you'd like to explore certain aspects further, or if you need any additional revisions. Here's a more detailed and enriched version of the ultimate revelation, 5. The ultimate revelation. 5. The ultimate revelation. Ethan's descent into the dark depths of psychological manipulation had come full circle. No longer the confident, controlling man who had once made women chase him, he was now a broken shell of his former self. His quest for power, for control over the minds of others, had led him into a labyrinth with no way out. The more he tried to manipulate his way through the chaos, the more he found himself ensnared, tangled in a web of deceit, broken relationships, and self-doubt. Maya's return had shattered any last illusion of control he had. She was the mastermind, the architect behind everything that had transpired. What began as a mentor-student relationship had evolved into something far darker. Maya had been manipulating him all along, using him as a pawn in her game. The web of dark psychology that Ethan had used to entrap others had been used to entrap him as well. And now, in the endgame, he was left to face the consequences of his actions. In the final confrontation, Ethan found himself in a room with the women who had once been his conquests, Sophia, Elena, and others he had manipulated over the years. They were no longer the emotionally vulnerable women he had preyed upon. They were strong, empowered, and in control of the situation. The power dynamics had shifted completely, and Ethan was now the one under their scrutiny. They had come together, each with their own reasons for seeking revenge on the man who had once thought of them as mere objects in his psychological game. As Ethan sat there, surrounded by the women he had manipulated, Maya revealed the final truth. She had orchestrated everything from the beginning, not only to teach Ethan the consequences of using dark psychology, but also to show him something far more profound. Dark psychology was not just a tool for control, it was a mirror to his own soul. "You've spent so much time trying to control others, Ethan," Maya said, her voice cold and detached. "But in the end, you were never really controlling them. You were controlling the parts of yourself that you refused to face, the parts that were broken, the parts that were afraid, the parts that were weak." Ethan felt his heart race. The realization hit him with a brutal force. Everything he had done, every woman he had manipulated, every game he had played, had been an attempt to fill a void within himself. But the power he had sought had only made that void deeper. The very tactics he had used to dominate others had been a reflection of his own inner darkness, a darkness he had never allowed himself to confront. The women in the room weren't his victims. They were his reflections, the parts of himself that he had ignored or buried. Lena, with her resistance to his tactics, had shown him his inability to control his own desires and emotions. Sophia, with her return and manipulation, had reminded him that he couldn't keep running from his own past. And Maya, his mentor, had always known this truth. She had been guiding him towards it, using him to demonstrate that no matter how much power he sought, it would never fill the emptiness inside him. In a final, devastating moment of clarity, Ethan realized the depth of his own self-deception. The women weren't the problem. His obsession with power, control, and manipulation had been the real enemy all along. His constant need to dominate others was an attempt to avoid facing the truth about himself, that he was afraid, lost, and alone. But even in his brokenness, a part of Ethan understood the truth Maya had been trying to teach him. The women had manipulated him, yes, but they were not the true perpetrators. He had manipulated himself into believing that control was the answer, into believing that power would fill the emptiness he felt. In the final twist, Maya revealed that she had orchestrated the entire experiment to teach him a lesson he could never learn through mere words. She had shown him the destructive power of dark psychology, not as a means to control others, but as a mirror to expose the darker parts of oneself. Maya explained that she had been a victim of her own manipulations once, and that the cycle had to be broken. Ethan was now at a crossroads. He could continue down the path of self-destruction, or he could choose to break free from the cycle of manipulation and begin the painful process of healing. In the end, Ethan was left with a choice: embrace the painful truth about who he had become and begin the long road to redemption, or remain in the illusion of control, forever trapped by the very tactics he had once used to dominate others. Women in his life had been part of his journey, but they weren't the answer. The only way forward was through self-awareness and confronting his own darkness. The final scene showed Ethan, now stripped of his manipulative facade, walking alone through a foggy street, his mind filled with the weight of his choices. The game was over, and the consequences of his actions were irreversible. But perhaps, just perhaps, there was a chance for him to rebuild, not through power over others, but through power over himself.